as far as being a producer or artist, one hand washes the other. And I was able to use my money from producing to pay for my video to spark my artist career up, just like how a producer would do if they had an artist. You know, this year, been able to finally work with an artist that I've been trying to work with my entire life, you know, and put a lot behind this person, you know, and people were doubting him and everything. And I finally got to put out an album with this person, and I'm very happy to finally work with myself.
When the nominations for the 2004 Music of Black Origin Awards were announced, one name stood out above all the others. Virtually unknown to the mainstream before the release earlier in the year of his debut album, College Dropout, West had been a well-known name on the hip-hop scene since his emergence as a producer 6 years earlier. By the time the awards ceremony itself was over, Kanye West's name was one of the most celebrated in his field. Born in Chicago, Kanye began rapping while still at school. Chicago is traditionally not known for its rappers. It was once described in The Source, the Bible of hip-hop, as a city of 3 million motherfuckers who can't rap. That may have been so before Kanye West began his slow but sure ascent to the pantheon of hip-hop greats, but not afterwards. Born into the kind of home where solid values and a respect for religion binds such great numbers of Americans to many of the same ideals, it might have been considered appropriate for him to take a safe route through life. He could have had a steady but unremarkable career and become just another regular guy working for his living in America's third biggest city. But it didn't turn out like that. At an early age, Kanye developed a keen visual flair and went on to gain good enough grades to get scholarships at art school. It was here that he learned to manipulate computer programs to make music. By teaming up with Chicago's legendary producer, now.D, he soon got the breaks he needed to start producing for such artists as the great hip-hop maestro Jay-Z. From there, it was a logical and straightforward step to start rapping his own rhymes and to become a mainstream artist in his own right. In 2002, he suffered extensive injuries in an horrific car crash that might have ended his life. Rather than weaken him, the experience gave Kanye the impetus he needed to re-evaluate his approach and make that much-needed leap that would enable him to put himself at the forefront of his work. From the time of Through the Wire, the breakthrough single recorded while his jaw was literally wired up in 3 places, it has been a sure rise to the top.
I was making beats back in 7th grade because I wanted to design video games, and you know, I always had like that only child syndrome, do everything yourself, and I try to do the character design, the board design, the music design, and once I got there, that's kind of where I stopped, and I just got addicted to it. And really, I started off by making house beats because those were the easiest with the computer sounds that I had, and then I started trying to make them more hip-hop, and I found out about sampling when I was 14, and that changed my life. And then I bought my own sampler with my allowance. It was like $100 that you could hook it up to the computer, and then by the time I was 15, my mother helped me get my first sampling keyboard, which is similar to the one I still use today.
The tried and tested ways for young black men to find a way out of the cultural and social straitjacket that mainstream society in America prescribes for them has traditionally been through boxing or basketball. More recently, in the 21st century, this escape route has widened to take in hip-hop. Of course, few associated with the country's educational system would want to admit that this is how it is, and for many, it may no longer be so. But for those who want something other than a safe job in a giant corporation, or who simply don't relate to mainstream society, the music industry holds the highest cards. Even without the lure of the bling-bling culture, the girls, the cars, the clothes, and the platinum jewellery, the rewards are great. But it's also a scene where names come and go, where overnight success can often lead to a correspondingly quick and sure one-way ticket to oblivion. The competition is intense, and if you don't keep it up, you're history. Kanye West was born on June 8, 1977, into a relatively secure middle-class environment. His father is a former salesman turned award-winning photojournalist, and his mother a lecturer in English. Perhaps in keeping with this, Kanye developed a keen visual eye and an affinity for poetry early in his life. But it was to be music that really inspired the young Kanye West, and by the third grade, he was already making his first tentative steps as a rapper. Although at that time, hip-hop as we know it today was still in its infancy, it is easy to forget that as an art form, it has been around since before Kanye was born. As early as 1971, Grandmaster Flash was experimenting with techniques he called cutting, which was essentially an early form of scratching. By isolating the instrumental breaks in records by artists such as James Brown and Funkadelic, and by using 2 record decks and constantly flipping the stylus back to the beginning of the break, a whole new approach to DJing was born. This in turn led to the early pioneers becoming remixers and producers in their own right, and it was quickly realised that the drum beats that formed the foundation of the tune were the crucial starting point of building a piece of original music. In 1977, the year Kanye West was born, Grandmaster Flash teamed up with Melly Mel to begin recording the first classics of hip-hop. The Message and White Lines quickly became mainstream hits. Up to that point, funk, soul and disco had been the staples of the black music diet, with bands such as the Meters stripping the music back to its essential components. Many of their songs were funk instrumentals, with a few words or phrases chanted over the relentless interplay between guitar, bass and drums of the rhythm section. By dispensing with the words and keeping brief snatches of the rhythm track, the DJ or MC could loop or repeat what came to be known as samples and construct a new backing track of his own. Over this basis, his own words were spoken or chanted. Rap was born. Years later, Kanye was evolving his own strategy for coping with the pressures that would inevitably face him when he left high school. With his diverse talents, he could become a graphic artist, a writer, or work with music. Like many of his generation, his aptitude for visuals evolved into an interest in video games, and for a while, he considered the option of training as a programmer. In an interview for MTV News, he recalled the process by which he first became attracted to music programming. "I had a computer," he remembered. "I was drawing on it, and I was going to make video games. I went to art school and got scholarships. I still drew on it, but I started using it more for music." But still, the stigma that suggested that Chicago was not the ideal place to come from if you wanted to make it big in hip-hop was a limiting factor in getting a break. In reality, it doesn't matter where you come from. Talent is talent, and its evolution is not dictated by geography. Nonetheless, in the street culture that has produced so many of the world's greatest black music artists of the last 3 decades, pride in and allegiance to your neighbourhood, to your gang or your friends is paramount. Even in the 3rd biggest city in America, it has been hard to gain respect in a world where coming from what is seen to be the wrong neighbourhood block is itself a liability. According to one well-respected black music record label executive, if you're from Chicago and you're not from the West Side, then, right or wrong, you're not going to cut it. But, as a fellow Chicagoan producer, Harvey Allbanger put it, Kanye West's strength is precisely that he does come from Chicago. With links on his father's side to the deep south of America, he understands the importance of soul in rap music. In his formative years as producer, he was to sample many of the greats of that genre. This was often the raw material for his production work for other artists that helped establish his name as one of the foremost in the business. And if rules exist to define working methods, they have to be challenged if any progress is to be made. The alternative is to go round and round in circles, making the same moves over and over again. It's never been a good policy for a true original, and it wasn't going to be enough for Kanye West. In the meantime, though, as a young wannabe looking for a break, Kanye was in dire need of a mentor to help him break through. Working in isolation, using only his instincts, may have been good enough to form a basic understanding of the business of providing beats over which to lay the next elements of the tune. But with only basic computer music programs at his disposal, he was getting nowhere fast.
I'm really happy about it. I'm trying to see how I could take, the success I have and flip it into other opportunities for myself and my friends and family, and just, have a wonderful career, or have a wonderful life after the career, because the career won't last forever.
Kanye has admitted in interviews that his first love was for rhyming. Putting that aside to provide beats for other artists was born as much of financial necessity than any love of production for its own sake. That may be true, but everyone knows that cutting your teeth with those more experienced than yourself, even if you start low down and work up, is going to give you a pretty good basic education to draw from later when you strike out on your own. But that, of course, depends on who you work with. As he recalled in an interview, I was always rapping, and it just so happened that really phenomenal rappers started rapping over my beats before I got a chance to. That put me in the classification of a producer, but I'm a rapper at heart. Kanye started rhyming seriously when he was 14. A year later, while still in high school, he met the budding producer now.D, who was moving up fast in the local hip-hop scene. now.D's first break came with fellow Chicago-based rapper Common, who had started out as Common Sense, and who was soon to make a name for himself on the national hip-hop circuit. It was from now.D that Kanye got his first really useful tip. Up until this point, he had been meticulously building his own breaks and backing tracks, using whatever technology came to hand. now.D's advice was simple. He told Kanye, "You need to sample from records." From that moment, the young Kanye West found his life transformed. Then, at the age of 15, it was in time-honoured fashion that he began to move forward. Having borrowed money from his mother for a sampling keyboard, he holed himself up in his bedroom and began redesigning his own future. His early attempts to fit in with mainstream life included a stint as a knife salesman, a job at his local outlet of The Gap, and a year at art college, where he was found to be an unusually gifted student. But it was dropping out after only a year's attendance that would eventually give him the inspiration for the title of his debut album. Even for the most talented artists working in any field, knowledge and expertise, no matter how thorough, are in themselves only useful if you know the right people. It's a shame, but a fact nonetheless, that the world lacks the time and the motivation to scour each neighbourhood in the land looking for those few lucky people who will change history. From the time of his first meetings with now.D, it would be another 6 years before Kanye got his first really heavyweight break. In the meantime, there was the usual round of hopes and disappointments, and day after day of hard work and determination. He began hanging out at clubs, eager to taste at first hand the cutting edge of hip-hop culture. He was way too young to be let in, but when your need is that strong, you find a way to do whatever it is you need to get ahead. Kanye is quoted as saying that even at 13, he was sure a major record label would sign him up. After all, he was Kanye West. How could they resist? Later, while still at college, he got the word that Columbia Records, one of the biggest entertainment corporations in America, might be interested in signing him. Unfortunately, it was his now legendary arrogance and unstoppable self-esteem that got him unceremoniously bounced out of the building. While talking the big talk in the plush Columbia boardroom, he let it be known that he was going to be the biggest star on the planet. He was going to be bigger than Michael Jackson. He was going to be bigger than hip-hop legend Jermaine Dupri. That turned out to be a big mistake, as one of the Columbia executives he was interviewed by turned out to be Dupri's father. Having been brought to the interview in a shiny Columbia limousine, when he got downstairs, he couldn't find a taxi home. Perhaps he should have kept his arrogance to himself, but with hindsight, a lot of things become clear. His call from Columbia contributed to his decision to quit college, and without that move, he might still be an average nobody, stuck in a humdrum job while daydreaming of another life, a life he might never have.
I predict stuff. Like the day of my accident, I remember being on the cell phone at this one store, like calling, trying to get a bigger car because I didn't feel comfortable in the car I was in. Like really going through a whole ordeal, and I couldn't get the car. And that night, I would have never had Through the Wire if I was in a bigger car. I nearly lost my life. I was coughing up blood for like 3 weeks. My mouth is still not quite in the right place. But it was the best thing that happened to me too, so I can't be mad at it.
Life is full of strange coincidences, and things are never quite what they seem. Having been dismissed from his interview at Columbia Records with those ominous, heart-sinking 3 words, "We'll call you," Kanye might have expected never to come into their orbit again. But in 1998, he got the call from Jermaine Dupri himself, who wanted to buy a beat from him for his album Life in 1472. It proved to be the break he needed. Once the hip-hop community became aware of this hot new talent from Chicago, doors began to open. 3 years later, he finally had to admit that it was a fact that Chicago was not the best place to be to cut a significant future for himself, and moved up to New York. It proved to be the right decision. Before long, Kanye came to the attention of Jay-Z, one of the biggest and best respected names in rap, with millions of album sales to his credit. Crucial to the success of such classic Jay-Z cuts as ISO, Hova, Girls, 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 The Takeover and '03 Bonnie and Clyde was the expertise of the new kid on the production block, Kanye West. From there, he went on to work on tracks for other big league names. These included The Truth by Beanie Sigel, which was bolstered by Beatmaster West's infectious groove, as well as Guess Who's Back by Scarface and Talib Kweli's Get By. It's no secret that many of the most inventive hip-hop tunes brazenly plunder the riches of the past. And it's not just black music that gets the sample treatment. Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath and The Doors have all at one time been taken as the basis for a brand new retro killer groove. But it was Kanye West's way with classic samples of black music's golden past that endeared him to many of the great names. For Jay-Z's ISO, he went right back to basics and took a snatch from the Jackson 5's classic, I Want You Back. It was an inspired move. Kanye has since said that he wanted to do more than take a recognised classic and make money from it. Many tunes are big precisely because they reference the past and remould a classic break in such a way that the break itself becomes the reason for the track's success. But often that kind of success can prove somewhat suspect. For Kanye, it was better by far to take a sample and speed it up, or disguise it in some other way, so that you know the groove makes sense, but it's not immediately obvious why. And whatever he was doing, he must have been doing it right, because his connection with Jay-Z led to a deal with Rockefeller Records, the record label built by Jigga and his friend Damon Dash. Kanye was now in with the heavyweights, and his future seemed assured. From then on, his production credits read like a run-through of a who's who list of 21st century hip-hop.
I hope I can follow this up. I don't know. I'll never be another Through the Wire, never be another Jesus Walks. So I can only hope to just go out and just make new music. But I think judging by the music I made in 2004 alone, like I felt like I've given away half of Late Registration just to other artists. Brandy, Overnight Celebrity, and a Dilate People's record. Those all could have been on Late Registration, which is the name of my next album. So that gave me a good feeling that, I'm not whack and I can make good and better songs, because I feel like Overnight Celebrity is equal to, if not better, than everything on A College Dropout.
A quick look down the list reveals not only work with many of black music's brightest stars, but a healthy dose of crossover into the pop mainstream as well. Nas, Da Brat, Foxy Brown, Mad Rapper, Twister, Jay-Z, Lil' Kim, Cameron, Mos Def, R. Kelly, Alicia Keys, Britney Spears, Janet Jackson and Jennifer Lopez are just a few of the names that have benefited from Kanye's considerable expertise. No wonder he was itching to take the mic for himself. If he could hold down an endless string of jobs with names like that, where could he go if he struck out on his own? The answer was easy: straight to the top. But it was not to be as simple as that. His journey to the stars was to include the roughest ride of his life. Before he could take full control of his own destiny, he had an important appointment with fate that was to change his life. The idea of what people call a Damascus moment goes back to the Bible and a man named Saul, who set out on the road for Damascus with a sword in his hand and a band of experienced soldiers, determined to wipe out Christianity once and for all. In a dramatic turn of events, he was struck by a blinding shaft of light. He fell unconscious, and when he awoke, he became baptized, changed his name to Paul, and became one of the most passionate advocates of Christianity in the whole of the ancient world. This is not quite what happened to Kanye West, but the notion of a life-changing event holds true. And it was not a shaft of light that changed the course of Kanye's life, but a rather more sinister force. As well as having to deal with the realization that his life had nearly been taken away from him, he claims he was also subjected to harassment and racial stereotyping. 2 weeks after signing to Rockefeller Records, following a recording session, Kanye was driving back to his hotel in Los Angeles in a rented car. The accident occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning on October the 23rd, 2002. The smash was horrific. He sustained serious injuries to his head and his jaw was broken in 3 places. But the crash itself was only the beginning of his troubles. While he was sitting in his wrecked car, the LAPD began testing him for alcohol, not once, but 3 times. Kanye was distraught. All he could think of was getting to the hospital. Finally, when the paramedics did get him out of the car, they dropped him off the stretcher. The LAPD have since confirmed that it is state policy to test for sobriety in drunk under the influence cases, provided the driver is physically capable of taking the test. Kanye said afterwards, "I was completely in pain and racially profiled and harassed. They did 3 or 4 tests on me for alcohol." Even when the ambulance finally got him to hospital, there was more trouble to come. They had wired his jaw incorrectly and had to break it again to put it right. Then, after he left the hospital, he had to deal with the other musicians, who'd tell him how sorry they'd been to learn of his accident and how scared they were he'd die before they'd get a chance to work with him.
Well, God, blessed me and gave me the opportunity this time to have, my finger on radio. And I can't enjoy that without being, generous and allowing other people to eat, because if I'm selfish, then he'll take away my blessings.
On the face of it, all this might seem enough to crush a less resilient spirit. But Kanye was strong enough to use all this dark energy for positive gain. No sooner was he well enough to rap than he was in the studio laying down rhymes for his first single, Through the Wire, which made use of a sample taken from the Chaka Khan classic, Through the Fire. Due to his injuries, he was forced to sing literally through the wire, holding his jaw together. At the same time, he went to work on 2 mixtapes. Mixtapes are the lifeblood of street-level hip-hop. Once again, if you look at the history of mixtapes, you come up with the name Grandmaster Flash. In 1973, Flash began taping the parties he was playing. Copies of these early gigs were circulated on the street. In that way, both ends of the market were kept alive. The MCs could keep in touch with their followers, and they, in their turn, could track new developments. But to keep abreast of the new moves was not cheap. Tapes sold for $1 a minute, and many of them ran to 120 minutes. Flash was making $2,000 a month without having to break a sweat. Today, the principle is still the same. Mixtapes are the unofficial recording industry that the major labels are powerless to suppress. The difference now is that in many cases the price is lower and the tapes have become CDs. Sales for a good mixtape are high. Just don't expect to see them in the official charts. The 2 mixtapes Kanye worked on when he was fresh out of hospital were called Get Well Soon and I'm Good. They contained arguably some of the best hip-hop to be heard in the following year. He followed these with a 3rd mix, titled Rehabilitation. It was here, on these 3 mixes, that many of the tracks from his debut album were previewed. In the meantime, fans could listen to his production work on Jay-Z's album The Blueprint 2, released in November 2002. By then, it had been 4 years since Kanye had sold his first beats to Jermaine Dupri, and 2 years since his first deal with Jay-Z. By the beginning of 2003, anticipation for his own solo album was intense. He had a working title, and his mixtapes showed that he had already done much of the groundwork. In fact, College Dropout would contain work that had been more than 3 years in the making, tracks that had been developed in the gaps between professional commitments. Already Kanye was demonstrating his eclectic approach to his own work, as an early version of 2 Days on the Get Well Soon mixtape would verify. Here, he was combining contributions by Mos Def and rapper Freeway with the Harlem Boys Choir. Whatever College Dropout would be, when it was finally released, it was clear that it was going to be special. But there was still much hard work left to do. While the world waited for the release of his first album, Kanye was already planning the next 3. The second would be called Late Registration, the third, Graduation, and the fourth, Good Ass Job. If all this sounded like a wind-up or just plain wishful thinking, it was hard to know how much to take seriously and how much to put down to his curiously off-the-wall mindset. This was a man who readily admitted that among his interests were on the one hand God and on the other strippers. And, as he had remarked in interviews, if that was the case, why not be upfront about it? And still the work kept coming in. To date, he has produced at least 1 track on every Rockefeller release to find the light of day. And with all that to think about, how did he decide which tracks to let go to other artists and which to keep for himself? The answer was easy. He kept the best for himself and let the others go. As he has said, he felt he had to give himself the best chance, as the competition was so intense. Not, mind you, that he was giving away substandard material. It was just that he was incredibly prolific, and as his reputation grew, everyone wanted in on the act. Among the projects he was working on in May 2003 were tracks for the radical political rap outfit Dead Prez, and for an album by Ludacris to be called Chicken and Beer. Add to that work for the underground rapper Consequence, and a new discovery from New York called John Legend, and you begin to get an idea both of the sheer volume of work that was coming his way and its essential eclecticism.
I love just trying out new songs and getting to rap. If you came to any of the shows, you'll know that I really rap it all the way through. You know, I got my breath control together. There's no like hype man like supporting the raps or anything. I'm talking about complicated raps. I just had to learn how to rap them. I always admire Eminem for that. Just being able to say those complicated raps all the way through.
By October 2003, the collaborations were becoming more mainstream. With his work for Ludacris on the track Stand Up, having helped the album rise to #1 on the hip-hop charts, and with his contribution to Jay-Z's The Black Album further intensifying his already impressive credentials, Kanye was soon back in the studio, working this time with Alicia Keys. He produced You Don't Know My Name, the first single from her album The Diary of Alicia Keys. And still the stars kept queuing at his door. A week after working with Keys, he was booked to contribute his distinctive magic to new tracks by Janet Jackson, in readiness for the legendary soul diva's next release. It's a wonder he ever found time to sleep. By December, he was being featured in a far more curious project, a documentary film about mixtapes. And if that sounds strange, there seemed to be perfectly sound reasons for its existence, at least in the minds of the filmmakers, who wanted to leave for posterity an insider's view of this underground phenomenon. Kanye was among the acts recorded for the project. The film included a look at the scene in cities as diverse as London, Paris and Tokyo. Also featured would be an exposé of bootleggers surreptitiously duplicating mixtape CDs at a pressing plant, and an interview with the Recording Industry Association of America. All this for a process that was vital to the lifeblood of street-level hip-hop, but virtually unknown to a mainstream consumer base. By January of 2004, Kanye's star had risen further thanks to his collaboration with Twista on the track Slow Jams. But his next project as a producer was certain to raise a few eyebrows. The news that Jamie Foxx was soon to be recording an album would probably come as no surprise to those who are used to seeing their favourite rap stars diversify their portfolio by acting in movies. Eminem, Mos Def, Sean Puffy Combs, Ice Cube and Exhibit are just a few of the high-profile names who had made respectable appearances in mainstream movies. But this was different. Jamie Foxx seemed to be moving in the other direction, going from a notable career as a comedian to appearances in movies such as 2004's Collateral, in which he co-starred with Tom Cruise, to cutting an album with Kanye West acting as producer. Kanye seemed easily capable of taking all this in his stride, even while gearing up in January for a run-through at Sony Studios of College Dropout, which had at last had its release date fixed for February the 10th, 2004. The preview took place on January the 20th, and among the artists present for the event were both Common and Mos Def, who make guest appearances on the album. The occasion turned into a virtual one-man show, with Kanye lip-syncing most of the songs. The evening included an impassioned plea for honesty made among the audience of his peers. "I'm asking you all, I'm begging you all," urged Kanye, having climbed onto a table to address the gathered throng. "If you all feel this is a 0, give it a 0. If you feel like it's a 5, give it a 5. He went on to admit that as far as he was concerned, it was the future. "I'm asking you all not to let the future pass you by, because this is history in the making." For Kanye, a lot was riding on the album's success, not only for him, but for hip-hop in general, and in particular, perhaps, hip-hop made by those originating from Chicago, bearing in mind that it was supposedly a city where no one knew how to rap. This was his chance to prove the world wrong. But when it comes to the public's taste in music, preferences can be confusing. Unluckily for Kanye, the week that he chose to release his album also saw the release of the second album by the new age jazz singer Norah Jones, whose music is as dreary, bland and undemanding as she could possibly make it, without changing her name to Dido. With no other significant competitor in sight, were it not for this unwelcome intrusion, Kanye would have had the #1 chart spot all to himself, with sales in the first week of College Dropout's release reaching 441,000. Perhaps it was the fact that he chose to release his album too close to St. Valentine's Day, figuring, no doubt, that all those eager female fans out there would be powerless to resist. Maybe he hadn't reckoned on the mesmerising effect that Ms. Jones's homely prettiness would have on all those eager male fans out there. People can be so predictable.
You know what it was? It was Twista. That Twista song came out, which was originally on my album. And then he came out, he sold 300,000 the first week. That was so good. It was a blessing, but it ruined my surprise that I had for everybody. My surprise was how much I was going to sell the first week. I knew it. I had calculated it. But when they saw the Twista, it kind of like gave them a clue. And they're like, oh.
Such is the record industry's paranoia about losing sales, that it places a stranglehold on true creativity, preferring instead an endless run of safe bets. Consequently, the industry is clogged with artists whose output is profoundly conservative, constantly referring to the past rather than taking the risk of breaking new ground. The problem is that the public has grown dependent on the sense of security that such unchallenging music provides, like an old family photograph that seems to reflect a time when life was somehow less complicated. Why bother struggling through an album by Captain Beefheart, if he was still making any, when you can relax with a musical Radox bath in the company of someone like Jamie Callum? One of the offshoots of this life-denying mentality is the celebrity duet. Often the thinking behind teaming up even the unlikeliest of musical partners is purely economical. Why restrict yourself to one market or one fan base when you can appeal to half a dozen? Consequently, you end up with the farcical situation whereby Frank Sinatra performs a virtual duet with U2 singer Bono, with both artists recording their contributions thousands of miles apart, and with Sinatra ending up deeply confused about the identity of the man he was supposedly recording with. The practice is also endemic in the hip-hop world, although undoubtedly for different reasons. Sinatra had no idea who Bono was and confused him with the American singer Sonny Bono, who in the 1960s had stormed the charts with I Got You Babe, recorded with his partner of the time, Cher. By comparison, the hip-hop scene is a thriving community, with artists entering into intense and often violent competition with each other. But, conversely, producers, rappers and musicians equally often form close ties and provide each other with vital support and solidarity. Crucial to all of this is the notion of respect. In such a world, the worst insult you can offer is an act of disrespect. And no hip-hop artist with any vestige of respect for himself would ever consider recording with someone whose identity or musical credentials were a total mystery to him, just because some account executive had assured him that by doing so he would shift more units in some godforsaken backwater in Middle America. Kanye was able to call upon an impressive cast list of collaborators to ensure that his album reflected the wealth of talent that the hip-hop world had to offer. As well as the contributions already mentioned from Mos Def and Freeway, Kanye was able to call on Jay-Z, who provided guest vocals on Never Let Me Down. He also brought to the sessions rap veteran Old Dirty Bastard, also known as Dirt McGirt, who provided the benefit of his distinctive approach to the track Keep the Receipt. Add this to the appearances Kanye was making on other people's tracks, including Twista's Slow Jams and Brandy's Talk About Our Love, and it seemed it was impossible to avoid hearing Kanye West on the radio in 2004, no matter how hard you tried. But the fact is that the music industry is not a place where people act out of a selfless sense of altruism. Everyone is delighted when you succeed, but they will distance themselves from you by more than one step if you fail. And the higher you fly, and the heavier your reputation, the harder you have to beat your wings. Kanye had announced to the world that he was making the all-important move from backroom production to a full-on life in the limelight. He had invented for himself a world where, no matter what claims he might make for himself, the burden of proof of his abilities lay squarely on his own shoulders. It was sink or swim time. Accordingly, plans were drawn up to send him out on the road, fully kitted out to get up and convert the hip-hop audiences of America to prove that he could not only talk the big talk, but walk it too. If he succeeded, the world was his oyster. If he fell short, it might be back to the drawing board, or in his case, the production suite. Braver men than he had failed.
Man, it surprised everybody. It even surprised me sometimes. When I got finished with it, I was like, damn, this is good. Maybe I messed up. Maybe I shouldn't have made it this good. Maybe I should have gave myself some room to grow.
With his album riding at number 2, still stuck in the queue behind the irrepressible Norah Jones, Kanye hit the road to take his show to the people. Supporting him on his trek around the clubs and campus halls of America was the veteran rap crew Dilated Pupils. His 7-week journey to the heartlands of the nation kicked off on March the 16th, 2004 in Blacksburg, Virginia, a town with a name that conjures up all kinds of intriguing associations. The gig was booked in on the campus of Virginia Tech University. It was one thing to create convincing material in the safety of the recording studio, where a dodgy take or a missed cue can be smoothed over with no one any the wiser when the finished result sees the light of day. It was quite another to climb alone and emotionally naked onto a cold stage and face a crowd of anonymous faces, many of whom are there for the blood sport thrill of seeing you fall from grace. No matter in what light you might see yourself, to the audience, with their combined critical radar set on stun from the start of the first number, you are just another entertainer. If you can convince them by the end of your set that you are the new Messiah, descended from above to lead them all to glory, so much the better. If not, better watch out. And if you're Kanye West, who is not known for modesty when it comes to assessing his own place in the world, you'd better have the moves and the grooves to take the audience by storm. 34 nights after opening in Virginia, Kanye would dock in the hold of Spaceship Chicago for what all hoped would be a triumphant homecoming. 3 nights at the Chicago House of Blues. And if he failed there, he might as well leave town for good. In the meantime, as well as holding down his own tour, he still had other commitments lined up for his return. One of these was a promised appearance on the debut album by the hip-hop violinist Miri Benari. If the words hip-hop and violin sound out of place appearing in the same sentence, you haven't been paying attention. She had already been making a name for herself working for Jay-Z and Wyclef Jean, as well as performing in her own right as a jazz artist. Her unique styling had made a distinctive contribution to many of the tracks on College Dropout, and now she was set to make her debut, fusing classical with hip-hop. Kanye had also been working with Jadakiss on his new album Kiss of Death. There seemed to be no end to the number of people who wanted something from him. Yet another project included a track on a Jay-Z tribute album, a double CD release featuring one set of hip-hop tunes and another of R&B. Kanye's contribution would be his reading of 1,000,001 Questions. Meanwhile, eyewitnesses at Kanye's one-off benefit appearance in New York, a hasty diversion made from his hectic tour schedule, confirmed that Kanye was indeed able to prove that he had what it took to successfully work an audience. He had claimed the stage for his own and had worked his magic to agreeable effect. So far then, so good. During this time, it seemed that ramifications arising from the car crash of 2 years earlier were not going to go away. Initial reports suggested that Kanye had not been involved in a collision with another car, but it now turned out that this was not the case and another driver had been involved. Furthermore, it was alleged that West had originally told the police that he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and that this had led to the collision. But now that second party had emerged, claiming that it had been the star's reckless driving that had caused the crash and that it had cost him a hefty amount in hospital bills which he was looking to Kanye to pay. Kanye denied any liability, but it seemed, if taken to court, it would be down to him to prove his innocence. On April the 3rd, Kanye was joined on tour in San Francisco by Rockefeller hopefuls Young Guns. Shortly afterwards, it was announced that Kanye himself would be making yet another guest appearance, this time on the leading single from an album by Slum Village called Detroit Deli, A Taste of Detroit. And he wasn't finished yet. Also booked to benefit from his services were the indie rock band Maroon 5, who had already had considerable success in their own circles and were looking for a bit of street savvy to pump up their credibility in other markets. Having already had a song licensed to the soundtrack of the summer blockbuster movie Spider-Man 2, they were clearly hoping to expand their fan base further and figured that Kanye was just the man for the job. The problem now, though, was that he seemed to be spreading himself too thin. Where would it end?
Sometimes I'm scared of the responsibility. You know, some people come up to me and they say I'm a leader, they say I'm a prophet, just because I have like songs with a message that reaches people in a certain type of way. But I mean, I'm letting you guys know right now that I'm not going to be doing this forever.
The MOBO Awards are Britain's way of recognising the extraordinary amount of musical talent that people of black origin contribute to the world. The affair has all the bling and glitz of any other award ceremony, with egos brightly polished and fashionistas lurking unseen, hoping that the latest celebrity to catwalk their creations will represent them in grand enough style. The great and the good, the posers and the mediocre hangers-on are all there on view, jealously guarding their fistful of the limelight for all they're worth. The lineup for this year's Love Fest was unusually impressive. Nominated for Best R&B Act were the hottest names in the game: Alicia Keys, Beyoncé, Brandy, Lamar and Usher. Best Hip Hop Act would be contested by G-Unit, Jay-Z, Kanye West, Outkast and Twista. The Best Video category invited votes for Jamelia, Jay-Z, Kanye West, Keyless, Ludacris and Usher. The Best Single nominations were for Jamelia, Kanye West, Mario Winans, Outkast and Usher. And lined up for the Best Collaboration contest were 2Play, Brandy featuring Kanye West, Marquez Houston featuring Joe Budden, Twister featuring Kanye West, and Usher featuring Ludacris. The lists went on, each one featuring at least one mention for Kanye West. He was also nominated for Best Album and Best Producer. Kanye won in 3 categories, walking away with the Best Album, Best Producer and Best Hip Hop awards. Not bad for a 26-year-old from Chicago, the city, remember, of 3 million no-hopers, with his debut album only out 6 months. It was hard to see what more there was he could achieve. Perhaps the answer lay in a bewildering marriage of the sacred and the secular. Much has been made of the bling culture and the shallow materialism that R&B and mainstream hip-hop often represent. One might reasonably expect that in a country where conspicuous success is encouraged and fame and money blatantly worshipped, that Afro-Americans might see fit to seek an alternative to the beliefs and practices of the mainstream society that had in the past so ruthlessly repressed them. But they had clearly embraced that culture for themselves and seemed to deliberately avoid any critique of conspicuous consumption. Add ice worship to religion and you get Kanye's range of Jesus-themed jewellery. These were chains and rings positively dripping with diamonds, ideal for the fashion-conscious sectarian believer with a severe case of status insecurity. And yet, in the lyrics to Kanye's second single, All Falls Down, released in America on the 24th of February 2004 and on the 1st of June in Britain, he seems to be criticising the bling culture when he says, "The prettiest people do the ugliest things, for the road to riches and the diamond rings." And on his third single, Jesus Walks, released on the 25th of May 2004, with a second CD released on the 26th of October, he reminds the world that Jesus was the champion of oppressed peoples the world over. To the hustlers, killers, murderers, drug dealers, even the strippers, Jesus walks with them. To the victims of welfare, feel we living in hell here, hell yeah, Jesus walks with them. Clearly, he's coming from a different place than the morally self-righteous Republican wing in America. George Bush made his ideology very clear when he described the so-called war on terrorism as a crusade. With its associations with the Holy Crusades of the 12th and 13th centuries, when Christian knights rode to Jerusalem to assert the dominance of Christianity over the Islamic world, it was an unfortunate term indeed to be used in the 21st century in association with any aspect of American foreign policy. On the one hand, Kanye seems to be lining up against the Republicans in reminding them that Christianity is supposed to be the religion that practices tolerance, and criticising the hip-hop culture for being blinded by the whole bling-bling scene, and on the other, announcing his own range of Jesus-friendly jewellery. But perhaps the most important thing is the music, and the message that singles like All Falls Down and Jesus Walks convey. Maybe it's a case of, don't do what I do, listen to what I say. In October 2004, it was announced that Mariah Carey was back from a 2-year hiatus and was about to release a new album. Ms. Carey had, 2 years previously, been through a disastrous phase when attempts at a movie career and a new album had so spectacularly failed that it seemed as if she was out of the running for good. Now, however, it seemed that she had followed the path of many of her peers and drafted in the best producers of the day to give her a much-needed credibility boost. Consequently, she'd been working on tracks with the Neptunes, Snoop Dogg, Jermaine Dupri and R. Kelly. Oh, and not forgetting, of course, Kanye West.
What happened is Jay-Z had rapped on my style of beats and made these beats. The first time ever these beats became radio beats because Jay-Z was such a radio figure. So he broke that sound. Then I rode the wave of that sound. And then the thing is I had, the attitude, the humor, the whole image to go along with it, the story. So he gave me so many things, and I spoke for so many groups of people, college students, backpackers, Chicagoans, working class.
And so the Kanye West Overland Express rolled on, with anticipated stops in both your life and, it seemed, that of practically everyone else in the known universe. Was all this activity perilously close to overkill? After the release of his album and his third single, Kanye had announced that he was setting aside all work for other artists to concentrate on his own career. Yet his collaboration with Mariah Carey seemed to contradict this. Perhaps the fact that Ms. Carey, once one of the highest profile artists in the world, was so desperately in need of help in order to recover her career arc, meant that the money was so good that Kanye could hardly afford to let such a prestigious assignment go. Or maybe he's just a guy who can't say no. At the Source Magazine Awards in October 2004, Kanye achieved yet more recognition for his amazing debut year. He won in 3 categories, including Breakthrough Artist of the Year, Album of the Year for College Dropout, and Video of the Year for Through the Wire, which he co-directed. At the beginning of 2004, Kanye had been one of the most respected producers in hip-hop. By the end of the year, he was also one of the best-selling artists in a highly competitive and changeable industry. Where would his extraordinary talents take him next? Having proved that he had what it took to cut it as a live performer, and having co-directed his own first video, for which he had won a prestigious award, it seemed that his early training as a visual artist had not been in vain, even though originally he had, as his album title announced to the world, dropped out of college to pursue a very different career. Yet in the world of music in 2004, it was no longer the case that as a musician you made albums and toured your songs and left it at that. A career in music very often led to equally high-profile work in other fields. And for Kanye, whose restlessness and prolific output seemed to say that he would not be happy staying in one place for too long, it seemed likely that he would follow so many of those who'd gone before him to Hollywood, where he could work as an actor, as a writer, a composer or director, without apparently any limit to his formidable talents. We seem to live in a world where everything is accelerating at an extreme rate. Advances in technology mean that you can now perform functions that would, 10 years ago, have taken a large amount of equipment and days or weeks to complete, on an average laptop and in a fraction of that time. In the field of the creative arts, particularly music programming and video editing, are now easily done using relatively inexpensive resources. And for someone like Kanye West, who has the world in his hands and the drive to achieve even more phenomenal success than he already has, it seems there are no limits. And whatever he does next, it seems certain that the world will follow every move with rapt attention.
Thank you for buying Maximum Kanye West. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.